Good morning, everyone. I'm Asha Nayaswami, and we're continuing our sheltering in place with God, fireside chats. So let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master, Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Dearest friend Swamiji, bless and guide us, that day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, we remember your presence. We remember our divine mission to be instruments in this world of your loving consciousness. We are your children. Bless and guide us always. Om. Peace. Amen. This being recorded on a Thursday, must be the 21, 22, the 23rd of April, 2020. We're still in the middle of our sheltering in place worldwide pandemic. Those are really big words, aren't they? We've just been using them rather casually for weeks now. Early on in this situation, Jyotish and Devi were inspired. Jyotish and Devi are the worldwide directors of Ananda. They live mostly at Ananda village, but also a great deal of the time in India, and they also spend time in Assisi, Italy, the three main places where Ananda has communities. And they are at Ananda village, which is when they saw this coming, they canceled all other travel and settled in there. And they had the very appropriate inspiration from God that we should unite our energies in the unique way that we have. You know, every person in the world has a way to serve, and one should always try to serve. Could somebody bring me a glass of water? We always try to serve at whatever level is the most refined level that we can reach for, and everything else that we can do. Once we're devotees, and once we begin to understand the power of being able to be instruments of the divine, it's appropriate for us to not only think in terms of how can I help in obvious physical ways, but also how can I unite my energies with divine energy and really be an instrument of light into the world. You know, it's funny, for me personally, I've been working on both sides of it, of course. I'm giving these broadcasts, which is my way of trying to say to others what I feel Swami might have said to us in the midst of these circumstances, based on both intuition and experience with him. And then also, when I haven't been broadcasting, a great deal of my time has been spent sewing cloth masks, you know, just passing them out to our community and passing them out to our neighborhood and passing them out to our greater Sangha, just sort of on whatever level, how can I serve? Swamiji said, when difficult times come, the first question to ask is, how can I serve? Because as soon as we begin to serve, then energy shifts from what about me to how can I give? And it's very interesting. One of the very first spiritual principles that I read, was when I was just before I turned 19, and I was given a book by Swami Vivekananda, and it was really the light switch turning on for me, meeting the teachings of self-realization. I was listening to Swamiji speak, and he was recounting, as he often did, especially at the end of his life, how he came to be on the spiritual path. And he talked about this intense search for truth that he was on, but his inability to find any satisfactory avenue in which to pursue that. Because the only idea he had of God was his mother's Episcopal faith. And even though her faith was very deep, and she was, in fact, a very, very, very spiritual woman who simply expressed it through that means, Swamiji did not find inspiration in that teaching or in any teaching related to Christ, as he later learned, not because of Christ, but because of the way it was presented. But his mother had a book on her shelf, which was called the Short World Bible. And he was packing up her house because she was moving to Egypt, where her husband, his father, was already stationed as an oil geologist looking for oil in Egypt. And he asked if he could borrow that book from her. And in it, he read excerpts from the Upanishads and from the Vedantic teachings and from Sri Ramakrishna, as it happened, which this is the first time I've thought about it. I was introduced to the spiritual path by a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, and Swamiji read some words of Sri Ramakrishna and was profoundly inspired by the expansive quality of the spiritual, of the definition of God that was presented to him. Yesterday, in our conversations with millennials, I spoke to Lakshmi Lapine, and we were talking about who needs God anyway? That was the title we gave it. And she was talking about the attitude of some of her colleagues and friends who would rather rely on themselves than rely on a higher power. And as long as that's working for them, then they're not interested in anything higher. We were talking about hard times coming to the world to push us beyond what we ourselves are capable of controlling. And when that descends upon us, we either crack, fall into depression, commit suicide, become drug addicts, all sorts of things, or it opens us to the possibility of realities that we were never willing to consider before. In that conversation with Lakshmi, I mentioned the 12 steps, and one of the important steps being surrendering to a higher power. And in the context of the 14 steps, it's exceedingly dramatic because one doesn't surrender to that higher power until one has reached the absolute limit of what the ego can do. So we're, as devotees, we're sort of often in this sort of transition zone between having developed enough personal strength, which is a necessary stage on the spiritual path. That's the caste system in you, one of the other fireside chats on this in this series. Enough personal strength to be able to test the limits of my own power, which is a necessary stage. We can't just be passive because we don't, as Swami put it, have enough energy to sin, and therefore we appear pious, but it's really just a lack of commitment to action at all. We have to develop willpower and the ability to stand up, and we have to reach the limit of that power before we realize that there's something else going on here. So coming back to finding ourselves in a worldwide pandemic, isolated from one another to a large extent in our own homes, presenting Sunday services to a camera in an empty church. It's just like all of us, this has become the new normal. I've visited briefly, but not deeply, some of the daily broadcasts of news stations and of especially the late night shows, the comedian news deliverers, broadcasting out of their houses, teaching us how to make pasta, playing with their children. It's just people who we're all used to a completely different reality, and now we're caught in this one. But the reality that we've been primarily used to is the one where life was predictable and to some extent cooperated with our egos, especially if we had developed enough power and had enough good karma. Both go together, meaning you have to have both. You can have power and not have good karma because you've squandered your power. But if you've used your power well, you can have power and good karma, which gives you the illusion that we can actually control our circumstances. But we can't, and we never could, and we can't now. It's just sometimes it's more obvious. Sometimes God lets us play like children. We just get to pretend, you get on a carnival ride and you think you're steering the boat when actually your little boat is on a track, just being moved where it's going to be moved, but you get to spin the steering wheel. I saw a father pushing his child down the street, and the little stroller that he was pushing him in was like a little plastic car. And so the little boy, who was just enjoying it thoroughly, was, he was driving and he had this whole feeling of moving it, but his father was just pushing him down the street. I thought, there we are, aren't we? I remember a moment that I had when I was living at Ananda Village and I was working at the publications building. And, everything was a lot more primitive then, and the outside and the inside blended a lot more. I remember when we took down a picture of Master that had been on the wall for quite some time in that building, we discovered a whole family of bats had been living behind that picture the whole time. That was exciting. Yeah, that was, as someone said, that was worth watching those bats fly all over the house and all over the building. And I remember bats, I try to admire them, but they frighten me. And the bats had sort of dispersed through the building. We didn't quite know where they were. And I remember I was sitting at my desk and I was writing something, and a bat landed, hit my hand and then fell on the paper. And it's so interesting what we do in the moment like that. I actually stood up, picked up a box, and put it over the bat, and then began to scream. I did all of that very calmly and then began to scream, and everybody came rushing in. It was just a bat. It was nothing really to panic about, but there we have it. But sitting in that office one day, I had a Selectric typewriter, which was really top of the line for pre-computer machinery. And I lived at Ayodhya, which was a mile away, as the devotee walks, is how we put it, over the hills, through the woods, over the hills and through the woods and by the pond and to the building. And I walked, rain or shine, snow, heat. It didn't make any difference. I had no car. That's how I got there. And I remember, it was a wonderful walk every day. I loved walking, sometimes with my friends, sometimes by myself. And I was sitting at my typewriter, and there was a tiny, tiny little spider, very tiny spider, but with lots of attitude. That was not a word that was common in the early 70s, but I will apply it now. This spider had attitude. The spider was not conscious of its relative importance or size or anything like that. It was full of itself in a way that was actually quite charming. And he and I had a nice relationship for a while. And he walked across the space bar, and then he made his way up the keys, and then he walked across the platen, I think it's called, like this, and then he sat on one of the little things, and he just watched things for a while. Then he scurried here and he scurried there, and I took a long pause and just enjoyed him. And I have a mixed attitude toward insects in my living space. Sometimes my motto is death to all intruders. And sometimes it's live and let live. It just depends sort of on the mood of the moment. So I was more in a live and let live mood with the spider, but I was conscious of the fact that he was very small. And by contrast, my thumb was very large. And I held his life in my hand, literally. I could just at any moment go like that, and all his attitude wouldn't have made any difference. There it was. And all of a sudden, while I was doing that, I felt the hand of God. I felt the hand of Divine Mother. And I saw her watching me every morning walk through the woods, holding her thumb over me, just as I was holding it over the spider. And that Divine Mother could have just snuffed me out, just like that. And so I carefully gathered the spider and took him outside. But I thought how often we just live with this idea of, this power that we don't have. Another moment like that, I was in Prayag, I think that's what it's called. It's on the route between Rishikesh in India up to Badrinath. Yes, I think that's where it is. And it's this incredible place where two rivers join. The Alakanda, I'm not going to say, many of you know this place. Two rivers come down like this, join together, tremendous power, and it's part of the Ganges, of course, system, everything is. And because this was India, not America, right at the point where at the juncture where these two rivers join, there's a cement platform of some kind and a little bit of a rock. There's a cave there. There's a couple of chains that are anchored to some iron pillars because it's auspicious to bathe in the river there. And there's a little bit of a platform. The river current is tremendous at that point. So you have to bathe very carefully and have to hold on to the chains. And when our pilgrimage group was going in there the first time I was there, we got some really strong people to hold people in. Because I just stood there. I stood there and I watched that. You know, as I was saying, in America, you would never be allowed to do anything so dangerous. They would, because somebody would be afraid of being sued. But in India, you get to do what you want to do more. But I remember standing there watching those two rivers conjoin and realize it would be so easy just to slip into that water. And in a matter of moments, I'd be dead. Just be out of my body. I'm not suicidal, but I was contemplating the fragility of life and my own mortality. And you know, I could just step into that water. There would be worldwide consternation because I'm fairly well known in the Ananda world that if I slipped out of my body, people would be very alarmed. But I also realized that in the great scheme of things, it was my thumb over the spider, like that. Just like how many bodies, how many lifetimes, how many incarnations do we strive for God? And I think of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna laments, how can I kill my cousins? Krishna says, you see their bodies fall, I see their spirits rise. Same experience. Body is cast away, the spirit is freed. And in God's proper timing, not throwing it away carelessly, but in God's proper timing, and especially sacrificed for a noble cause that you believe in, it's exhilaration and upliftment. It's not, there's nothing wrong with it. So here we are, and I just thought, I mean, I didn't, obviously, but I loved the realization of how ephemeral this world is. But I also loved the realization that we just move through this world apparently as physical beings, but we're not physical beings at all. We are a powerful divine force that is moving through this world at the behest of the divine with a deep and profound divine purpose. And everything that's happening in this world, even though this pandemic looks big, and it's really impressive that the whole planet is engaged in this thing. And we have no idea, really, what's going to happen when we are ever released from our homes. And they talk about releasing us from our homes, but we're not immune to this virus yet. And I mean, I don't think we're at the end of this. We're all little spiders with the thumb of Divine Mother on top of us. And it behooves us to look inward and upward. You know, we can keep looking at our computers and we can keep reading the news and we can keep looking out the window and, you know, wondering what's going to happen. But it behooves us to look inward and upward, to really ask ourselves, not why is this happening, but why is this happening? And instead of creating tension and anxiety and resistance and protest and fear and despair, how can I cooperate? I didn't I didn't choose to be born. I don't even know who and why I am what I am. Here I am. The great masters have given me wonderful answers, going all the way back to Vivekananda when I was starting. He said, don't think about yourself and you'll be happy. What a novel thought it was to me. I always calculated my own advantage or the threat to me in all circumstances. I wasn't selfish, but I was quite self-concerned. I was quite generous because generosity was often to my advantage, and I didn't do it selfishly. It was just more fun. Generosity was more fun, and I knew that. My advantage was always, how can I have the most fun? So I was always choosing that which seemed like the most fun to me. And by the grace of God, fun to me was usually more elevated than not. But nonetheless, I was still always thinking about myself. But gradually I've come to understand that there is no myself to think about. Where does this life force come from? Who am I? Why was I born? Where does happiness come from? This is the whole spiritual path. And in these fireside chats, I've talked about a lot of these things, and you can go through this or through any aspect of Ananda anywhere. And many, many people will be giving you very valid theories of happiness, which I encourage you to investigate, because we need to be looking inward and upward. And Jyotish and Devi, in an effort to harness for good the power that we have collectively as devotees, initiated many weeks ago this weekly Warriors of Light meditation every Thursday morning, California time, Pacific Standard Time, from somewhere in the world. Some Ananda leader. Now the leaders are speaking from Italy. After this month, they'll start speaking from India. Then I think it will come back to America, at least for a time. And every Thursday, someone speaks to us about the nature of reality and where we can find happiness. And when challenging times come, what is the right response? And warriors of the light is the idea. Now, some people would like us to be peaceniks of the light. Why aren't we just advocating that? Well, because willpower is required. And that is the nature of this world. We don't just sink backwards effortlessly into perfect happiness. And that's the problem. I talked about the caste system. I talked about karma. I've talked about the patient application of willpower. Because the way we are made is that we have an inclination to sink into the lowest dimension of our nature, the dullest, the least aware dimension. And then we have a divine call within us saying, look inward and upward and rise to your true destiny as an instrument of the light. And even as we struggle to be an instrument of that light, the shadow comes over us. It comes over us internally. It comes over us in terms of fear, in terms of doubting our own worthiness, in terms of doubt as to whether subtle forces even exist. We all get pushed into this. I had a very important realization in the last few days. You see, here I am 50 years on the path, and I just noticed something that I think I should have noticed a long time ago, but I didn't. Partly because, good and bad, strength and weaknesses within us have a dance, and they play this dance. Many of you know, because you know my story, I met Swami Kriyananda. I had instant recognition. That was just before Thanksgiving in 1969. So we will cross over 50 years on this. And I just knew who he was. I knew who he was to me. I've never doubted. It took me a year, but I moved to Ananda Village. I've never looked back, ever. I've had bad days. Everybody has bad days. I've had disappointments. I've had struggles. Everyone has struggles. By no means has it been clear sailing, but I've never doubted the essential basis of my life. So therefore, I didn't notice how much I doubt God. If you'd asked me a week ago, I would have said no. But then, my dear, why are you nervous? And I couldn't answer it. It's very interesting. Every dilemma that you have in life, and I've known this, you come all the way down to it. It's always a lack of faith in God. The belief somehow that I'm in charge, and I know that I'm incompetent, and therefore that makes me really freaked out. But if we look inward and upward and realize that we are all children of God, and our mother loves us, and she may put us through the ringer. And to be fair to myself, I have to also say that nervousness is not just lack of faith in God. It's lack of faith in oneself. And I think if I were fair to myself, that's what I would say. I don't know if I can deal with it. Or I'm afraid of the effort, and I'm afraid of the pain. You see, everything comes back to fear. Isn't that interesting? Lack of faith in God and fear, either that He won't come through for us or that we won't come through for Him. But none of that is valid. We are children of the light. We are warriors of the light. And in this time of great challenge, Devi and Jyotish created for us this beautiful affirmation. I'm just going to repeat it. God's light is within me and around me. Well, that's a good beginning, isn't it? I'm going to interrupt as I read. There was a Master wrote a healing prayer, and it says, manifest thy healing presence. I carefully just re-edited that into manifest thy energy, light, and joy. And for decades, I was saying that, and many other people were saying it. And then I read somewhere where Master said, in the presence of God, no darkness can exist. And I realized I completely changed the meaning of that prayer inadvertently, just out of sheer lack of awareness. And I wrote a global retraction. Manifest thy healing presence. God's light is within and around me. If we really knew that, why would we ever worry about anything? And with the sword of light, with the sword of that divine light is not passive. That light is a power. Even if the world has been in darkness for thousands of years, as soon as the light comes in, the darkness vanishes. So we pick up that sword of light. We don't just passively sit in it, but we pick it up and it becomes the expression of our willpower. With the sword of light in my hand and with the love of God in my heart. Because everything we don't do out of fear. We don't do out of selfishness to have power. We do it because we love God and we are His children and we want to be His instruments in this world. The channel is blessed by that which flows through it. And with the love of God in our hearts, we can change the world. With the sword of light in my hand, with the love of God in my heart, I am a warrior for the light. I do not sit passively on the side and with weak, wishful thinking, wait for things to get better. I stand in the stream of light and ask God to use me. Use me with my love. Use me with my light. And then because we are not alone, within Ananda we are not alone, and on this planet we are not alone. We are all one in the spirit. I join my brothers and sisters everywhere to overcome, which is to rise above and dissolve fear with faith. If I truly believed in God, why would I be afraid of anything? Help me, God, to have that faith. I will overcome all fear and anxiety with calm, acceptance, and joy, and faith that God is in charge. I will overcome hatred with the love. You can't ever win someone by defeating them. You win them by magnetizing them to a greater reality. I will overcome hatred with love and dis-ease with health. All disease is overcome by a radiant sense of well-being. It isn't a question of whether we have the virus or not, whether we have bronchitis or not, whether we die or not. Dis-ease is lack of knowledge of God. And I will overcome that with true health, which is a radiant sense of well-being in the light and in the love. Lord, let us fill this world with God's light. What greater prayer is that? I urge you, Thursdays at 8 a.m. California time, go on to ananda.org and be part of this great movement of light. Yes, the pandemic is the immediate object that we're concerned with, but the play of light and shadow goes on for all eternity. And one by one, as we awaken, we step out of the shadow and into the light, for in the light is everything we seek. God bless you.